There's been a lot of discourse recently about Ezra Klein's new book, which is called Abundance, one of the arguments of which is there needs to be, and I disagree with a lot of stuff in the book, but the one point I take from it that is good is that we on left, progressive, Democrat, whatever, need to have a solid record of actual accomplishments that we can point to and we can defend. We don't want high-speed rail to be a boondoggle, because then it's indefensible, then nobody wants progressive governance. And so that gets us to what we're here to talk about today, which is that you and Unfucking the Republic have put forth, you've thought deeply about this question, well, how do you put things together that are going to speak to people, that are going to address the problems very seriously? So tell me a bit about the non-negotiables agenda and why you put it together.
So it started as really a response to Project 2025. So it was, I think, the first piece that we did on it was April of last year. So it's been more than a year since we've had this document in our hands. And a lot of people have sort of characterized it as this, sort of dystopian blueprint for how they want to take over the country. Whereas I actually see it as the epilogue. I see Project 2025 as sort of the capstone to the 70-year neoliberal experiment, whether they know to call it that or whether they know to lean into it or not. But Project 2025 is not even a theoretical possibility had they not laid the groundwork for 70 years to bring us to the moment of which is really the end of neoliberalism and the beginning of something else. We're in a very transitional period right now. And I was thinking back at the time, oh my God, we're going to lose again. This is a disaster. Like I didn't see a clear path. And we got a lot of pushback, I'll tell you, from listeners and viewers who were just like, stop talking. The more you have this sort of negative outlook, the more it's going to become a reality. And I was like, we're a rounding error. We're basically a drop in the ocean for the greater narrative. What I'm trying to put forward here is that we are rudderless as a party. Now, I say as a party because it's multiple constituencies that are now aligned but still segregated in opposition to whatever this thing that Trump is. Trump can basically be identified as the symptom of what they want Project 2025 to be. But he's a temporary bully. He's a would-be king. He's a charlatan. He's not the problem per se. The problem is this agenda that they have basically run on and successfully implemented for the better part of 70 years, with the peak of the neoliberal agenda appearing, as you and I have discussed in the past, under democratic regimes. The peak of professional neoliberalism occurred during the Clinton administration. It was the best that it ever was because it was the most ruthless to the lower and middle income classes of this country. And it was particularly ruthless for Black and brown Americans. And so we don't really have an identity in the I'm not a GOP member left. So when we look at that broadly, we only have a couple of ways to approach this. Do we start a third party, or do we try to reform the Democratic Party? That, to me, is sort of the central debate that a lot of people are having on the so-called left. So first, I just sort of wanted to offer that definition that the left today is this incredibly broad but very fragmented spectrum of people that are simply in opposition to the Republicans but don't know actually what we stand for. So there's two foundational suppositions before we get into the actual non-negotiables. One is there are two areas that we kind of have to align on before we can even discuss what it is a platform might be. And the first is that at the federal level, the opportunity for third parties to win anything has been foreclosed on. It does not exist. That is not a critique of third parties and what they get done at the local level in different states, because there's many good third parties in different states that do good work. But on the federal level, it is impossible for a third party to actually win an election that's congressional or presidential. That, again, not a critique. It's just that they have stacked the deck since Perot had the showing that he did against Clinton, and they fundamentally altered the political landscape. So we have to sort of agree that building a third party is not a tenable option for us right now until we actually reform the system. That's part one. And part two is there are things that we all want. Unfucking the Republic, one of the core missions that we have is standing up for indigenous rights. Maybe your primary cause is LGBTQ rights. It could be mass transportation. It could be any host of issues, ending mass incarceration. The one thing that I will say about American politics is that you cannot form a mass movement until the population itself lives in economic security. A population that lives in economic precarity makes very bad decisions and ultimately leans into fascistic tendencies. And that's where we are right now. So if you can agree that a third party cannot win and that we need to make sure, first and foremost, before any of our other initiatives are settled, that the population has to be economically secure in order for us to actually do good things for people down the road, then we can talk about those 5 non-negotiables. So to me, that's the inflection point in the debate we need to be having.
Well, let's dive into these a little bit. I think I don't have much to debate on point 2 because I think that's right. I mean, I think that it is clearly true that economic insecurity and precarity create the conditions for would-be dictators to create scapegoats, a desperate, hungry population. You know, people have to look out for themselves first. It's very hard to get attention to other issues when people can't even pay their own rent. So I think I'm going to find it very hard to challenge you on that. So I want to talk a little bit about the third party thing, because this is a very contentious point on the left. I don't think on the left many people are going to disagree with your point 2. I think a lot of people are going to disagree with your point 1 because a lot of people say, you know, the Democratic Party has failed us. It can't be reformed. We've got to throw it out. We've got to start again. The sooner we start again building a third party, the better. Now, you've said we have to disentangle a few things here. So you said third parties can't win federal elections. And you said federal elections. I think it would be very hard to argue that a third party is likely to win a United States presidential election. I mean, Ralph Nader did try this, and he got his best showing 5% of the vote.
Perot is the litmus.
Perot.
He's the litmus test. I mean, Perot, far and away, outside of Teddy Roosevelt and the Progressive Party, which was similar to that, but also 100 years ago, Perot was really the litmus test, and that's what scared the establishment into fundamentally altering the rules of engagement.
So, right. So, but we can't look at Perot's showing in order to assess the chances, because it's post-Perot that the chances are diminished, right? Because they determined to make sure that something that successful doesn't happen again. So, let me just clarify first, are you saying, though, that when you say federal elections, that all House seats, all Senate seats, we shouldn't, I mean, you know, there was that guy Dan Osborne recently who was, I think, an independent candidate, right? Not a Democrat or Republican, who had
Which is different because these are independents who are caucusing with a particular party and running on that mantra, but they're still tapping into the apparatus of the establishment.
I mean, should we foreclose the possibility that any third-party independent candidate can ever win in any congressional district or any state from now going on forward? Or do you think conditions vary enough to where we should say, well, look, these really don't work in presidential elections. They tend not to work. But if there is an opening, then yes, you could. Maybe there's a chance.
I would make the argument that we have a more parliamentary system in the duopoly than people are willing to recognize. And what I mean by that is that the hardcore alt-right element of the Republican Party has pulled it all the way to the right to where it is an unrecognizable political party. It is just I don't even know how to characterize it, because it's a political apparatus, certainly, but it is not ideologically pinned to anything that we recognize. Similar to that, There's a little bit of that on the left, but really not as much. We're far more conformist on the left and within the Democratic Party. But there are parliamentary aspects of how we operate and exist, which is why you have the Progressive Caucus, and there are deals that need to be made within the caucus. So we do have a broad representation, even within the duopoly. But the larger point, the larger takeaway here is that it's not that I'm suggesting that they can never win a single House seat. It's that there are 435 of them, and we have exactly 0 of them attributed to a third party. That there are 100 senators, and we have exactly 0 of them attributed to a third party. And an independent is not the same thing as a third party candidate.
Because Bernie Sanders is an independent who caucuses with Democrats.
Of course. Yeah. And he is very much an outlier and is as much an inspiration for why one would think that we need a third party and could make it happen, but also the very reason that we cannot. So the apparatus, when we just think about what it is that manages the electoral process that then becomes the governing process in this country, these are political apparatuses that have become corporations that are now rewriting the political regulations for how a third party can actually appear. So it is nearly impossible under the rules that they have rewritten themselves to even get ballot access. So what we've put forward is, I understand at an intellectual and a like a human level, the Democratic Party has lost its way and it is fundamentally corrupt. More than that, the mouthpiece, the organizing mouthpiece of it, the DNC, is so utterly bad at its job that it can only win big elections and take back Congress after or during a financial crisis. So you have Bill Clinton, who came about because of the Gulf recession, and the Democrats suddenly thought, the DNC suddenly thought it was good at its job. Barack Obama came back, surging back by winning, one of the biggest pluralities in an election because we were in the great financial crisis. Joe Biden won the first time because we're in the COVID, not crisis, the COVID recession. And that is why 1 and 2 are linked. A population that lives in economic precarity cannot see its way clear to make good political decisions. Also, the duopoly is not a political apparatus as much as it is a corporate apparatus now that has completely foreclosed on ballot access, initiatives to actually sign people up. And the amount of money and wherewithal that you need to have to mount an offensive on a third-party line in a single congressional district is so far beyond what is reasonable for an effort to have, that why are we talking about that when we should be taking over the rotting corpse that is being ventilated by money of the Democratic Party and use their apparatus?
It does strike me that it is far easier to take over the party, to win primaries, than it is to win general elections as an independent or a third party candidate. And I think this is what Bernie Sanders understood, which is why in 2016 he chose to run as he is an independent, but he is an independent who moves closer or further to or further away from the party as he feels it's necessary. So in a primary, that's your opportunity. And in fact, even though he didn't win, and you could say, well, they conspired against him, this shows that you can't win this way. I think that's wrong, because I think actually if Bernie got a bit of a late start in taking himself seriously, right? He kind of assumed that he couldn't win that primary. It turned out you could. At a certain point, he realized that 2016, that Hillary Clinton was a beatable candidate. Now, he didn't beat her, but he came really close, actually. And he did very well. He in 2022, to the point where they all had to sort of conspire to stop him again. And yes, okay, they conspired to stop him, and you could say, that shows that the system is rigged. But I think we just need to be better organized.
That's where I'm suggesting that we already have sort of a parliamentary element to the way that we govern in this country. It is not a true parliament, but it is a parliamentary element in that there are factions within the two corporations that exist to run the parties. But even in those two instances that we just brought up, the reason that Bernie Sanders was able to get as close as he did is because he was running in the Democratic primary. Zoran Mamdani identifies as and is a member of DSA, but he's running in the Democratic Party. This is the system that we have. If you want to talk revolution and you want to talk overthrowing things and you want to talk about third parties and that type of momentum to have enough gravitas, but what would a handful of insert third party candidates here or third party elected officials here out of the 435 do differently to sway the party than as Democrats who caucus and actually vote like progressives do? And we saw it on the Republican side. It's just that their agenda is evil.
There's one challenge I want to put to you, or question, because I'm curious what you think about this before we get to, as I say, the substance of what you think the non-negotiables are. So just on this role of third parties. Okay. I agree with you, a third party can't win a presidential election. But what a third party can do is cause the Democrats to lose a presidential election. Right?
We can do that on our own.
No, but a third party, what they can do is they can make the difference between one outcome and another. In fact, this is why people like myself and Noam Chomsky are always saying, like, okay, but if you live in a swing state, don't actually vote third party because we don't want fascism to come in. Mm-hmm. So please vote for the Democratic candidate, even if you hate them, because if you vote for third party, that can make the difference, as it did. If the Nader voters had voted for Gore in Florida in 2000, we might not have had the Iraq War. Right. So there's that. However, what that to me means is that there is one way in which you could use third parties in federal presidential elections, which is that if you had a set of non-negotiable demands, what you could say to the Democratic Party is, unless you adopt these non-negotiable demands, we will make it very difficult for you to win this election, and we will campaign in swing states, and we will now you could instantly eliminate the threat by acceding to our demands. And in fact, there was talk of doing this in 2024. Nora Ericott, who is being considered as the Green Party vice presidential slot, what she said to the Green Party was, if you adopt the position that we will drop out if Kamala Harris endorses a ceasefire in Gaza, right? And if she won't endorse a ceasefire, we will run to try and undermine her and keep her and make her lose. But if then I will join the ticket, right? And what I want to use this third party ballot line, the Green Party's ballot line for, is as a weapon, right? That can be used to get the party to adopt what we see as non-negotiable demands. And then they can't blame us for causing them to lose the election for being spoilers, because they could have eliminated the spoiler effect by just adopting the demand. So if we say in congressional elections, the Senate elections, look, we have our non-negotiable demands. Mm-hmm. You adopt them, you're never going to face a third-party challenge. You don't adopt them, and we will, in fact, try and organize and oust you because these are non-negotiable demands. How do you feel about that as a potential role for third parties in federal elections?
I think that the time for that has passed, and it's not the fault of the third parties. When we get into the non-negotiables, one of the core aspects of what's rotting the democracy that everybody knows but doesn't know how to deal with is the fact that money is now a proxy for democracy in this country. It has the equal rights to speech. It's a stand-in for many, many votes. Elections can be bought now, like just overtly purchased. And that has kind of fundamentally altered, in addition to it has fundamentally altered the calculus in addition to the technical aspects of redesigning the system to foreclose on third-party options, signature thresholds. So, it's like we're bringing a knife to a war, not even to a gun, to a war, by suggesting that a third party would have that type of gravitas to be able to fundamentally challenge somebody, because the signature thresholds, they just keep increasing them year after year. The amount of money that you need to galvanize just a signature effort to appear on a ballot is monumental. especially like in places like New York, where you would think that a third party effort could actually get off the ground because we have strong third party representation here. The Libertarian Party is a real thing here. The Working Families Party is a real thing here. And yet, even still, the ballot access threshold alone, that's just one aspect of it, is almost impossible. And you need a ton of money to be able to organize that type of effort. That's why I look at a guy like Mamdani and I'm like, yeah, look at what he's doing. I'm a democratic socialist, but I'm doing this by taking over the democratic apparatus. It's so smart. That's why primaries exist. The last bastion of democratic principles in the electoral politics is the primary. And even there, the Democrats did everything in their power to eliminate that possibility as well. AIPAC has done everything they can to weaponize that in their favor as well. And so like this idea of third parties being able to have that type of momentum is an idea rooted in the 1990s that no longer really exists in reality because money. So again, it's not that I'm critical, like third parties in New York are really important because you can, at a grassroots level, affect a particular election district and a Working Families Party can take a seat. But as it happens right now, they still don't have anything bigger than a school board or a city council seat, and not in New York. I'm talking about other cities. So what are we really talking about here when we say, I want a third party? We're going to herd cats into a third party all around the country instead of just saying, Democratic Party is fundamentally broken. We have a system to alter it. And here's the thing, if you don't do it, we're going to do what we did in the last election. We're going to stay home. That's the power that we have as people. And I would rather organize a whole bunch of people to simply not participate than to participate for somebody else that's never even going to show up.
Well, so that's interesting because, you know, I'm talking about a situation where it just strikes me as interesting that the Green Party in a presidential election can't possibly win, but they have this weirdly outsized potential leverage in the fact that when there are so many razor-thin margins that are making the difference, like 3 states, you know, 2% of the vote in 3 states. Well, if 2% of the vote in 3 states is making the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans, then someone who can attract 2 to 3% in those 3 states has quite a lot of power, actually, if they choose to use it to dictate terms and to say, like, I'll throw my weight behind you or I'll throw my weight behind you, depending on who's willing to adopt my demands. And so it strikes me as interesting that I thought, you know, if I had been advising Jill Stein, for example, I would say, you're not going to win this election. Don't run to win this election. Make a series of demands and say you'll support Kamala Harris if she adopts the demands. And lay out what you want and use your candidacy as an opportunity to threaten the Democrats with that small little bit of power that you have. But what you're saying there is, yeah, but why do you need a candidate to do that? Because there's an even greater number of people. Forget the 1 million people nationwide that voted Green in the last election. Look at all the people that stayed home. You know, just threaten that if you don't adopt the demands, you're not going to vote for them. Why involve a third party in that scheme at all? You know, we lay out our demands and we say you adopt them or you don't get our votes. And the third party element to that is kind of extraneous.
Right. And even if we go all the way back through history to somebody that you would probably register much higher up on your radar and my radar, and look at the multiple candidacies of somebody like Eugene Debs, when he barnstormed on the back of the train across the country, it's estimated that in the election where he pulled something like 750,000 votes, this is before he was incarcerated, he probably shook 250,000 hands. This is a monumental feat back in that era and that time. As a socialist that had true momentum before we had this anti-socialism and anti-communist fever that arose, you know, during the war. So somebody who had that much attention, that much of a willingness to literally put his own health at risk to meet every voter possible, still barely registered. Teddy Roosevelt, on the other hand, put together, because he was a former president, he put together a real run that altered the outcome of the election in Wilson's favor. But like, these are historical outliers, and even then they don't work. So when we talk about effort and energy and the attention span of the American electorate, you have to do so much education from the top down and then the bottom back up to identify, how do I become part of a third party? How do I vote for that person? Wait, does that mean I can't vote in this primary over here? Yeah, it does. If you register as I'm a member of the Working Families Party, you can't vote in the Democratic elections anymore. And that's why it's like, this system is rigged from top to bottom and bottom to top to be a duopoly. Why are we fighting that? Why is the energy on the left always about fighting the duopoly and the corrupt system, instead of doing as the GOP does and saying, time out, this is what we believe? It just happens that what they believe is horrible for people. It's terrible. But the difference last year that inspired what we were working on with the 5 non-negotiables is that at least they stood for something. Whereas the Democratic Party could not muster a platform or a position. Instead, they ran right of Trump on most of the high-profile issues like immigration. They actually ran to the right of Trump on that, which is an astounding thing to think about. Now, in practice, he's more right, but they ran to the right of that. What were they thinking? The only policy measure that the Harris campaign put out formally was a $25,000 first-time home buying tax credit. It was one of the dumbest, most irresponsible, and difficult to follow economic plans that I've ever read.
Yeah, and you're a guy who reads this stuff.
Yeah, it didn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
And it had so many loopholes in it. How is that going to resonate with the entire population?
Yeah.
The Democratic Party doesn't stand for anything, and the DNC refuses to let it. And James Carville hit it on the head. It's not about what you stand for. It's about winning elections. The Republican Party wins elections to implement their ideology. The Democrats win elections to take power. I want to go after those people. Now, you and I probably have different thoughts because I've read yours on David Hogg as an example. But I want to go after those people. I want to win the battles where I can within the apparatus of the Democratic Party to surface these things that we stand for, because my belief is, if we have enough people saying, well, what does it mean to be a Democrat these days? Well, it means these 3 things. And if we could do these 3 things, we can do these other 2. That's really powerful, simple messaging that has been missing from the Democratic Party since before Obama. Because, again, Democrats win national elections only when they're birthed in crisis.
Here's where I think you and I would probably agree on David Hogg. I mean, first off, I like the ousting of the old guard. I think that's important. The concern that I have, I didn't actually write the article on him for Current Affairs, but...
Is that Alex?
That's actually John Ross, who's a new writer for us.
Okay.
But he, the concern that he raised about it was that a lot of what Hogg says is non-ideological, right? And a little bit of excess emphasis on the youthfulness of candidates rather than their political commitments, which is to say, Bernie's old, but he's great. Like, you can be old and you can be good. You can be young and you can be terrible. So that's why it's so important that we have an explicitly ideological demands, instead of just like, oh, these Democrats are staying in office too old. They, look at all these. If I think it's the case that if the 3 of them that had died in office hadn't died in office, the budget wouldn't have passed. So it's that's bad. Right. But one of the things that we have to do, and one of the things that your non-negotiable platform is about doing, is making very, very clear that there is a litmus test, essentially, that is ideological, that says, no, you're not in our tent. It's not it's a big tent, but it ain't huge, right? Because the only people there's a price of admission. There's a guy standing at the gate of the tent, and the guy standing at the gate of the big old tent that will let anyone in asks you a question, and the question is, what do you believe? And if your answer is, I believe I'd like to be inside the tent,
Right.
you don't go inside the tent. Hope you're enjoying this interview. If you want to listen to full-length current affairs interviews before they are made fully available to the public, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/currentaffairs and become a supporter today.